computer.
And yes, now I have to say, okay.
Yes.
Now it's okay.
All right. And welcome to Talking Smart Conversations with colleagues in education from around the world. I'm our host. I'm the host, Richard Morehouse, and our guest today is Pieter Mostert. And by way of introduction, Pieter and I met, I think, in 1963, when you, Pieter, were on a study tour.
1983.
83.
1983, yes. Yeah.
1983.
Yeah.
And you and Karel I don't know how to pronounce Karel's last name.
Oh, Karel van der Leeuw.
Van der Leeuw.
In America, you would say Vanderlee.
Okay. So anyway, the two of you were on a study tour, and a
Yeah.
part of that study tour was training at New Jersey.
Yeah.
And so the story of our meeting is that Judy and I trained together at New Jersey in the Poconos. This was before they had Mendham and all kinds of other places. But anyway, I think we had 3 weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks training, and with Lippmann and Sharp and Ron Reed. And so that's how I met all of those people. That was my introduction to all of those folks. And Judy and I then, a couple of years later, decided that we would do a training in lacrosse for elementary school teachers. And I think we set up a 2-week session. And then you went up to Canada to meet with Judy. And I think she invited you down to lacrosse. And I don't know if you were for the whole workshop or just the week where we worked on the transcript.
I think it was particular that part, the part we worked on transcript and transcript analysis, which became then a special issue of analytic teaching. I do remember. Yes.
Yes. And then Pierre from Holland translated it into not to Holland, from Denmark.
Yeah.
Translated that into Danish. So that was the whole connection of that article. So it was such a great time. And I want to apologize for the lack of accommodations for your stay.
No, I never complain about that more. No. Say, but do you know that special issue of analytic teaching on transcript analysis, that still is one of the very few sources for people about doing transcript analysis in philosophy for children.
Yes, and
it's still, and it has never been done, let's say, in a more modern or elaborate or more research-like style than we did. So it's still there.
No, and I still think I think that's probably among the most valuable work that I've done. And the closest it came to somebody working on that, and I thank goodness I won't remember her name, so I won't embarrass her, but there was a student in Australia who was working on that. And I think what happened is she submitted her dissertation as a piece of, in full fulfillment. And so she didn't really have the coursework stuff. It was only dissertation only. And it wasn't ready. And I was one of the external reviewers. And I don't know whatever happened to it, because I said I just bowed out of reviewing it because it wasn't ready for time. And that's the only piece that I know that was close to that. And so
I was in Brussels now in January to talk to some colleagues who are working on philosophy for children in Belgium in the schools. And they had started a research project that would involve transcript analysis. And they said, please come. You seem to be one of the few people who has experience in that. I say, yeah, 40 years ago. Yes, but say nevertheless, come and help us.
Well, that's wonderful.
So,
I'm so
yeah,
pleased about that because that
yeah,
that that was a most uh, interesting intellectual exercise to do that as well. And
exactly.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
well, and
Okay.
so
So,
let's just kind of talk about the value um, beyond philosophy for children, perhaps even beyond philosophy, of the dialectic of philosophy for children as a pedagogical tool. Um, so, because I think community of inquiry, and I go back in my heart to Paul Goodman's old work, Community of Scholars, and Pierce's
yeah,
Community of Scholars, and Dewey, and current thinking about teaching as what's the right thinking out loud.
yeah.
All of those movements are so interconnected, and again, I like to go, and I think Jerome Bruner,
Yeah.
probably had quite a impact on Lippmann's work as
Yeah.
well. And then you could throw in that along with Paulo Freire, and there's such a rich mix of interesting pedagogy, and I don't know where to go from there, but maybe just your thoughts on any of that.
Okay, let's start there. Where to start? Well, where does it start for me, Mort, is when I was 11, I was a primary school student, my teacher did not like me in the class. And later I heard from my parents, many years later, that he expected more respect from my side.
Uh,
But I found it a very authoritarian man, very rigid, so I was not good in showing respect to him. And his plan was to promote me a year in school so that he was rid of me. Yeah. And my mother, she was a grade one teacher at that school, objected to that plan. She said, no, 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 no. Peter is a good student, but he's not going to skip a year. Skipping a year is not a good thing for a young boy. Yeah, go through it step by step. So she came up with another plan, and the other plan was that 2 mornings in the week, I would go to her class, the grade one students. Yeah, and I would sit on my knees at their little desks, you know, and talk with them about the calculus they were doing. In those days, they didn't call it mathematics; they just called it calculus, which I think still makes sense. But nowadays, everything has become mathematics. I sat there, and so that she had 44 children in the classroom, so that she could give attention to the one more sitting closer to her, and I did the back rows, the better students who were sitting. And she said to me, yeah, go and help them. Yeah, but she said, you're not allowed to give them the correct answer.
Mhm.
And apparently she trusted me that I would understand that instruction. Well, later my experience was that 80% of the teachers wouldn't understand such an instruction. Yeah, helping without telling giving the correct answer. Well, what am I here for?
Yes.
I understood that. And that's what I learned, to look at the children, to listen to them, and to say something in terms of a process of thought. Think about it. Like, and apparently I did well. And the 2 mornings grew into many mornings, and every time when there was calculus in the year one, the grade one students, I went over there and sat on my knees with the students in the back row to have a kind of mathematical conversation with them. And that came very natural. Later, I never went to teacher college because I thought, I know what I have to do as a teacher, you know, help, but don't give the correct answer. So I studied philosophy, got my degree in philosophy, and got into philosophy teaching, not as a subject, but of course in that dialogical style.
Yes, yes. Well,
So that's why it's a special thing for me. Yes.
well, I will go. I'll do a little bit of my story in terms of my own education. I had kind of a similar, well, some similarities. I was a history major as an undergraduate, and I was probably not a good student in that I wasn't very serious about education.
Yeah.
But I stuck through it. And so it took me basically 10 years to get a bachelor's degree because I was in and out of school. I was in the military and did all kinds of stuff. And well, then a couple of things happened. One, I had a teacher when we were living in California at Sacramento State, um, who was just a fantastic teacher. And because two things I remember about the
Yeah.
class. History and American intellectual history.
Mm.
And one was we read Leonard Cohen's Beautiful Losers,
Yeah.
experimental novel at the time.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely impenetrable. I had no idea at all about how to understand it. And we literally went page by page and talked our way through that as a
Yeah.
class.
Yeah.
And then the other thing he did, and we had a take-home exam at mid-semester. And he gave us a quote from Marx, All Quiet on the Western Front. And he said, analyze the Great Gatsby based on this quote. And he said, find some students you want to study with,
Yeah.
work together,
Yeah.
and as long as you don't copy each other, share as
Yeah.
much as you want, but write your own paper.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't remember what I wrote, but I remember the experience
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
so enriching to study that way. Well, then fast forward a year or two, I finished most of my history courses, but I didn't do any education courses at all yet. My sister was teaching at a local parochial school, and she was a history and a math major, double major.
Yeah.
She loved both, but she loved math more. But she got the job teaching history. And then one of the nuns got sick, and she was asked to teach the mathematics classes. And she said, well, would you like to do this?
Yeah.
And I said, well, why not?
Yeah.
So with no preparation at all, I taught 3 sections of world history.
Yeah.
And it was fun.
Yeah.
And then I took some education courses, and actually they made a lot of sense. And so I was a fair-haired boy of the education department. So with a bachelor's degree then, and no master's courses at all, I taught in the program that I just graduated from. I taught the students who were just a year behind me.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Oh,
But I constructed it, and always gonna one other little thing. I'm
yeah.
sorry, I'm taking up too much. I'm talking
No,
too much.
no. No, that's fine. That's fine.
But
You rest.
one other thing I wanted to add, as a part of my dissertation, it was a very open curriculum. And so one of the things I decided to do was reconstruct my education as a teacher. And
Mhm.
so we had done what we called micro teaching and lectures. I had never tutored any students. So I picked 3 students that were high school students that I tutored.
Yeah.
And that was such an eye-opener because it goes back to that not having people answer questions or giving the students answers, but just listening to them and
Yeah.
talking to them
Yeah.
and letting them figure things out. And that was just a really enriching part of my own
Yeah.
education. So,
Yeah.
so
Okay. Now, yeah, for me, why back to this is back to why these dialogues for me are so important, Mort, is that I think that um, it's not just the dialogue. I think as a young person, and go back to myself again, you just like to do some work in the classroom, and you like to do that together.
Yeah.
Yes, as long as that work is genuine. And
Yeah.
when I look back, I think as a young person, I had a good sense for smelling, that the the tasks in mathematics that were presented as real life situations were fake.
Oh,
You know, around where I lived, there was not a farmer who had a fence and had to decide if every second pole was rotten, how many poles he had to replace, and how many cubic meters of wood he had to order to get,
right.
so many new poles for the repair of the fence. It was evident that, but that was not about reality. That was just a way to hide a sum, to hide a calculation. I think and in schools, we have tried for too many generations to fool the kids
Yeah.
that the things they have to do, that they are real by bringing in fences, farmers, pigs, shops, stores, deals, whatever, buildings, houses. And they're just there to do the calculation. They're not there because it is important that you know. That's told, but it's not. And I think a lot of kids, and I did, smell that, like a rabbit. You smelled that the task we had to do was a fake one. Yeah. And that was not only there, that was in other subjects too. I think the big challenge and the big difference and the great strength of philosophy is that it's free of that fakeness, that there is no this single doubt that it's relevant. It may not be your personal favorite questions. It may be that your mind is filled with another topic, but you will never deny that what is discussed and explored and inquired, that is real life. I've never had a kid in my class that say, I think it's a fake issue. You know,
Yeah.
he may have a clear answer to it. So he may be impatient to tell his answer. He may or she may be impatient to listen to others. But the issue was always a real one.
That's very, I hadn't heard that expressed that way ever, I don't think, because um, I mean, I guess I sort of grew up with the fact, and I think you're right. I think I smelled too that those weren't real issues, but I never articulated it in that way. And so can you take the next step and talk about maybe those young kids that you were working on, how you made that into or helped them understand their early mathematics in first grade as a philosophical question?
Um, well, yeah, at that day, I don't have clear memories how I did it then.
Yes, yes.
Later, I always was fascinated by mathematics, although I'm not very in the higher mathematics. I'm not very good. My final grades were not so so good enough, but not yeah. Um, but then I think what I learned, possibly intuitively, is that even in the most simplest tasks, there's always more than one way to come to the solution. So instead of the hammering that if you have an equation, it must be solved this way. If you have an addition, it must be added in this way. Otherwise, you get the wrong result. Now I'm still involved as a governor in an English school, and I see mathematics is still that hammering that this is the only way, almost as if we're in church. Uh, You know,
Yes, yes.
and and what I see with the students, they have a natural talent for, if they're not sure to calculate it along this way, to come up with another strategy.
Yes, yes.
And any mathematician who is much cleverer than I am in math will say, yes, there are always more than one way to come to a solution. There are also crappy ways, wrong ways, uh, good luck ways. Maybe you're lucky that you get to the right answer, but there is no certainty. So not all ways are equal, but there's always more than one.
Yeah. Well, for me, the key to
That, yeah,
unraveling my own education was with interpretation. And I often say that my most fruitful semester was when I was what we called back in the 60s, I was a non-student. I went to classes, but I only went to classes that I wanted to go to, and I was never enrolled, so I never got a grade for them.
yeah,
I asked the
good,
professor,
yeah,
I dropped
yeah,
in.
yeah,
And the other thing we did was we drank beer and we read philosophy.
yeah,
And just because that's what the couple of guys that I was running around with liked to do.
yeah,
And I still remember reading Nikos Kazantzaki's Zorba the Greek.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
I figured out, and it was not new to anybody else but me, but I figured out that the whole story was about Apollo and Dionysius
yeah,
and and about the conflict between those things and
yeah,
how they interact with it. And reading it afresh, or now again, you think, well, of course that's what it's about. I mean, on one level at least,
yeah,
but nobody ever told me that that was what the novel was about. And I thought, oh,
yeah.
I can think, I have an idea,
A good idea. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
So,
something to discuss with others and something
yeah,
to
yes.
inquire further.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because I think I had some fairly good English teachers, but they always told me what I was supposed to think about these things.
yeah,
What
yeah,
what is Shakespeare? Well, no, we didn't really
yeah,
talk about Shakespeare. We just were told how to interpret it.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
And that was
And not, well, here we have this beautiful text. Let's sit together and do the work. Yeah. And then I think that's what philosophy, in whatever way you teach it or do it or encourage it or facilitate it, that is what philosophy is about, that
yeah,
here we have this beautiful material straight from the heart of life. Yeah.
yeah,
What does it mean? What does it mean for us? What do you read? What do you think? Yeah, that's that's what it's very simple what we're doing as philosophers.
yes,
There's beautiful material out there, either written or spoken or in a story or in an essay or in a logical proof of whatever. And then we look at it and say, yeah, now us here around, what does it mean to us?
yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and so with that in mind, tell me a little bit of it from what I gathered from the material of yours that I looked at. You are doing some kind of special instruction with adult students?
Um, well, at the moment there are adolescents. They work that are students. Well, most of them they're between under 18,
Okay.
and they have been arrested by the police.
Ah,
Yeah, and the police says it's more serious than a warning. Yeah, but it's not enough to be sentenced.
okay.
And in that, you can imagine, if you really stab somebody, then it must go to court and dealt with, etc. Yeah, if you spray paint an ugly word, on somebody's garage door, well, then the police can say whatever they want. Yeah, either a warning or in that in that the offenses in between. They here in England they call that a referral order. You're sent back to the community. And then there are, let's say, volunteers like me who talk with these young persons. Yeah. And for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, up to 12 months. Yeah. And there is a social worker added to it for all practicalities, setting up meetings, helping with education, etc. But the philosophical side of, you know, the reflection on their lives, of often difficult lives, and how whether it's possible to change your life, whether it's possible to change the route of your life and get onto a better path. That are our philosophical conversations. And that's what I'm doing now. Had one this morning. And
Yeah.
that's completely different from a classroom, of course, because it's in the private sphere of a single young person. But it's I need all my skills and all my wisdom, I
Yeah.
can tell you, to maneuver there and to open them up for some kind of exchange. Quite a few are very closed for good reasons, No, don't ask me. I'm not going to tell you. Nevertheless, there is a big demand in them to meet other people and start reflecting. Yeah, I've been doing that now for a couple of years, and that's for me, let's say, taking philosophy out of the system of education
Yes.
into, let's say, real communal life.
Well, it's interesting that early in my career, probably about the same time, or maybe just before. Yeah, it was before you came down for that. I wasn't teaching at Viterbo. I was working for an educational agency, and we set up a program that was actually funded by the Nixon administration called Community Education and Development. And a part of that, we wrote a project to do some alternate school education. And so we
Mm,
had kids on campus at Viterbo,
yeah,
and we did three things. We did sort of discussion groups that just generally about behavior and all kinds of other things. We exposed them to other businesses and possible careers. But then mostly one of the most interesting part of the project was that they had to do a community presentation. So something that they learned during the 3 weeks, that at the end of 3 weeks, they could present to their parents,
yeah,
anybody else that wanted to come. And so that was everything from putting on a reader's theater
mm,
to showing people how to do kung fu. I mean,
yeah,
whatever it
yeah.
was that they could.
Whatever it was, yeah,
Yeah, and
great,
got people, and they lived together in a dorm for
yeah,
3. But so it got to establish this kind of community where, and the only criteria for being is you had to be poor. And
yeah,
nobody knew if anybody in class, including the staff, whether they were A students or flunking out.
yeah,
And that was so nice because everybody was on the same plane
yeah,
and
yeah,
and we didn't even know by the end of the program who the smart kids were, because they
yeah.
all were smart. I mean, that was the
Yeah, of course, of course. That's not what you're addressing. You're
that's right.
addressing
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Oh, oh, hmm.
And yeah, see,
Yeah,
and I am sort of with, it seems to me that it's easy and we have thousands of examples of this, and still we don't, as a culture, know how to do this. I think either here
yeah,
in the United States
yeah,
or in England or in Holland or probably
mhm,
South Africa as well.
yeah,
And so how do we continue to work toward that? I know you talked about some of that as part of your bigger plan too, but
yeah. I don't know how to change a society more. No, I have no idea, and I don't have talent there. I think no. I'm a micro man. Give me people, and we'll get something done. I had conversations on the train that the train guard stopped and said, "Can I join?" You know, uh, yeah, of course, come and join. We're having a good conversation, you know. And people ask me, where did you learn that? I say, I don't know where I learned that. It's, you know,
Yeah.
when you get together and there is something interesting, it becomes a something. How to set that into a movement or in a change of society more, I don't know. Don't know.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I guess I'm trying to think about that in um, other ways. One of the things that has kind of caught my attention lately
Yeah,
is the whole business of third places, it's called, so that the stuff that happens, like you said, on the train, uh,
yeah,
as one in coffee shops,
yeah,
pubs, and we've lost a lot of that because
yeah,
many of us, when we were there were places where you could talk to relative strangers.
yeah,
And in the United States in particular, there are fewer and fewer of those places. And
yeah,
um, you know, when I used to take the bus all the time, there's a group of us that used to have conversations that sometimes almost approach talking with the whole bus, because
yeah, yeah,
there are three
yeah,
guys who were sort of loud in the back of the bus, and occasionally we would get other people involved in the
yeah,
conversation.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Mort, I agree that in many situations in society nowadays, I don't want to sound like an old man, but we've lost that.
Yes.
One of the few places where I see it is where people as a group come together and go out. For example, here in England, I'm part of the long distance walkers. I've always
Ah,
been walking. And like last Sunday, we did 25 miles. Well, takes us about 8 hours. And during those 8 hours, some of them I know, we're with, depends on between 10 and 25. But there are hundreds of members, so you never know who will come. Some you know, and others you don't know.
yes.
And walking and talking is not, well, I say it's not necessary. You can also walk and be silent, and that's interesting, and that's good, and that's important. But nevertheless, during those 8 hours, there are also the moments of proper conversation. And I think what's special for me of these Sunday walks is the conversation. I can also walk on my own, you know,
Mhm.
or ask somebody, a friend of mine, and say, "Come, let's go." But this group that only partially knows each other,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know, uh, put them on in their shoes and send them out for 25 miles. Interesting conversations will happen.
Yes.
But indeed, like last Sunday, I thought how special this has become because there are not that many occasions as a society where we bring people together and encourage them without any force or teaching, encourage them or offer them the opportunity to share a lot of time together and talk and listen to each other.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've been trying to think about this idea. I don't know if you followed Sherry Turkle's work. Do
No,
you know her? Well, she's quite interesting. Let me see. Let me, just one second. I'll pull this off the shelf.
sure.
Let's see. Oh, this is one of her more recent books. Uh,
Oh, yeah. Reclaiming conversation. I've heard about it. Yeah, I'll take a note. Yeah,
yeah, she is um, a Harvard person who ended up being interested in clinical psychology and cognitive psychology and ethnography. She did her very first book, which was, I think, a part of her dissertation about Paris in '68 and the Lacan Revolution
yeah.
and all of
Mm,
the conversation around there.
yeah,
But the interesting part is then she ended up at MIT with all of the science jocks, and she's an
Yeah,
ethnographer, and none of the people at MIT understand ethnography, and they certainly don't value it for a person
yeah,
to, stay on a tenure track, even because it's not mathematically based,
yeah, yeah. No,
So with that, she started studying everything from how old people and young people learned to play with dolls who were interactive back in the early 80s up through, and then
yeah,
through the internet, all of that. She dealt with all
yeah.
of that stuff. And I just think that her work is really important, and a part of, this was her second, well, I should say it's probably now her third from last book, because she's just sent a brand new book off to the publisher. But
Mm,
anyway, she writes like an ethnographer and kind of
yeah,
thinks like an ethnographer, and kind of hits the mark about how it is that we need to disconnect, or if not disconnect, use media this way rather than the canned, I'm thinking not with you, but for you kind of.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
anyways, so that's one of about 3 or 4 projects I'm trying to think through, and
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah.
so,
More, yeah, more for me, yeah, of course, it's connected to the media. At the same time, there are also many situations where people do get together. I learned that in South Africa, but the conversation is avoided.
oh,
I mean, and then there is no media or whatever to blame. People do get together, but avoid the conversation.
really?
And one of the things I learned in South Africa were two experiences I'll share with you. One is that when I went over, I was on a fairly regular scale that people invited me to come for dinner at their house. And I didn't know what to think of that. Why do they think I'm a poor Dutchman who can't, look after himself or whatever, Is there some talk going around about what I can and then I found out that it was always in families where they shared the evening meal but were unable to have a conversation. So actually, and they didn't want to have me as a formal facilitator. That would be awkward,
Hmm.
sitting together as a family, and here is this outsider coming in to facilitate a table conversation. That's like, having your family therapist at the dinner
Yeah.
table and then telling dad that he should shut up and telling mom that she should not walk away. No. So I sat there and shared it, and I was always thanked, for having, such a wonderful conversation. And then I thought here too, you know, people have lost the confidence to,
Well, was there some indication that that's related to kind of politics? I mean, here, since Trump in particular,
yeah,
people have been reluctant to have genuine conversations because
yeah.
somebody might have a different political position. But what was it that, do you know anything?
No, it was, it was, well, in South Africa, at least in the circle where I was invited in Bloemfontein, it was related to that people had learned to talk in the days of apartheid
Yeah.
and felt that that's the language that was no longer appropriate.
Oh,
So they still had the same feelings. They still wanted to say the same things.
yeah.
And nobody taught them how to say those things in the words of the days now.
Okay. Yeah.
So they rather shut up. The second was that, the influence of the church was crumbling. Nevertheless, people had religious feelings, but knew that you could no longer assume that everybody at the table was in terms of religion, was on the same page.
Yeah.
So there were all kinds of avoid areas.
Yeah.
And if you don't talk about that or have experience a clash and then say, well, one of the lessons is this is no longer a topic at this table, then you get a kind of a general muteness.
Yeah.
Oh, and my other example is I was in Bloemfontein and I met a important accountant of one of the big offices there, and he was interested in bringing representatives of the different churches and church communities in Bloemfontein together. And he called that an interreligious forum. And he invited me to attend, and I attended. And all I saw was a fear to talk about what they actually wanted to talk about, because everybody was afraid that they would say something that would be insensitive towards at least one of the other representatives. So actually, they talked a little bit around, and we're happy that they got together, but at the same time, in terms of conversation, no. So he invited me to facilitate a couple sessions there, whether I wanted to do that. I said, yes, yes, let me do that. And I think we need to do that. We need to find a way as an interreligious forum, yeah, to talk about things.
Yeah.
And it's not, a rehearsal of an old religious battle. So it must be sensitive, but it must also have a content. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember that I thought, well, how am I going to start it? And I said, well, we're not talking here about, let's say, differences between the religions. But I said, for tonight, I want to talk about, does religion help? Or does faith help? I said, that's what I would like to reflect upon. That's not an easy question, but does faith help? And everybody can speak from his own heart and his own beliefs and say what he means or she means that helping is.
Yes.
And they were all surprised. After 15 minutes, the first person bursts out in tears and tells about a life story he had never ever shared with anybody. So, yes, there's an avoidance for I wouldn't say incompetence. There's the avoidance of the conversation because we're afraid that it may it may hurt, that it may not work, that we may upset somebody. And for me, that's a big outside education. For me, that is the biggest area of need, I would say, in our wider society where we avoid the conversation.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
That's my point. That's the point I would like to make in this hour more.
Well,
Yeah,
you just raised all kinds of interesting reflections for me because thinking about this, my sense is that there are so many barriers like that, so many self-imposed things about education, about class, about race, all of
yeah,
those things where it's
yeah,
difficult to do that. And so that, going back to something like literature, um, uh, people, I don't, well, if you can, for years, I did a great books discussion group for
yeah,
adults. And those are interesting, especially if you can get people with different backgrounds and different experiences and
yeah,
not expecting anybody to know anything about literature or philosophy,
yeah,
because it's not their area,
yeah, yeah,
And so and that's part of the reason why I calling this called talking smart.
yeah,
Because I think where I've learned the most is in office conversations with students where we would actually just
yeah,
sit and talk smart. I mean, about whatever came up, and just try to talk intelligently about whatever
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
even though we were, different relationships,
Yeah.
and hallway conversations. Some of the best conversations I've ever had at the university is just when people either, because that was one of my,
Yeah.
what, uh, honeypots, I suppose, in terms of a fly trap, sort of.
Yeah.
'Cause I had made fresh coffee all the time, and my
Yeah.
office was always open, and so
Yeah.
people knew if they wanted to have a cup of coffee,
You have a coffee.
that's where they go. So that's how we, but that's how
Yeah.
we developed a community there,
Yeah.
but it is interesting because people are afraid to talk about all kinds of things that they really are close to their hearts.
Yeah.
It might be politics, it might be literature, it might be community development, whatever. But it's surprising how many walls come up when somebody raises a thing from a particular point of view, and they don't quite know how to say it, and then they'll say it either in anger or in
Yeah.
disappointment, or rather than having it as an open conversation.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yeah. So
we've got,
whether philosophical children will change that. I'm not such a movement man. I'm more of a soloist who does what he thinks he can do the best. And
I'll raise my hand to that too.
yeah. If others want to see it as a movement, go ahead. It's not. No, it's for me. It's that's what I learned from my mother. Teaching is by example. That's
Yeah,
all you can do is give a good example of how a conversation can be done, how pleasant it can be, that it's possible even where others say that it's not possible, etc.
yeah,
Just give an example that yes, it can be done and it should be done, and in general, it's a very honest and pleasant experience.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's
yes.
and still has always been one of my lines of that, well, how I grew up. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I suppose I think we started a little bit, and I don't know how much time we spent, but I want to keep these about an hour long, and I think we're
yeah.
close to being that. And I just want to thank you very much for this, and we will have to figure out how to somehow or another across this rather large pond, figure out how we can somehow keep some of this up and going. So
We can. Yeah. It's well, a conversation like this. Now you record it, but it's always possible to say, Peter, shall we have a regular conversation? An hour.
yeah,
I'm always willing for. That's one of the things I learned in the COVID period. To develop or to rediscover or to reestablish old relations with a friend of mine in Cologne and a good friend of mine in Johannesburg. Regular that we meet each other via Zoom and share things that happened or share some reflections about the world.
yeah.
Yeah. So let's continue that.
Okay. Yes,
Okay.
yeah, okay, now I got to push the off button and make sure everything is okay.
I see that.